Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the ecosystem, following on to some of the stuff that Ben mentioned, and then I'll talk for things that are very relevant for you guys. Yeah? So it's amazing. Today, we're living in one of the most interesting times, as the proverb says, when you have tech company valuations that exceed $1 billion for companies that are just 1-2 years old. Snapchat is a 2-year-old company worth more than $5 billion. You know, these numbers are astronomical. So, but what does it actually take to get to these valuations? And we do live in interesting times. So let's look at ecosystems, and feeding on from what Ben mentioned earlier. When we look at populations, the United States has about 313 million people. Europe has 600 million, and that's ex-Russia. Israel has about 8 million, and China has 1.3 billion people. And what I'm going to do is index everything along Europe. And so basically, US has half the population of Europe. Yeah? And Israel is 0.01 times the size of Europe. But what does that mean specifically from a venture investment standpoint? If you look at the invested capital, the US takes $29 billion of invested capital for last year, whereas Europe only takes about $5 billion. And what's more interesting is that actually the median round size is half the size of the United States. What does that mean for us sitting in this room today? Well, look, when you start your business, funding matters. It matters a lot because even if you have 10 employees, you have a fixed amount of burn. And if there's 10 employees sitting in the United States, they have the same fixed amount of burn. But the truth of the matter is, if that company gets twice the level of funding that you do, they have twice the level of runway, they can grow twice as fast. And so funding really matters, and I urge all of you guys to think very importantly about how you go about your fundraising activities. What's really interesting, again, looking that Israel is 0.01 times the size of Europe, but yet again commands twice the amount of funding, yeah, on an average round size. It's absolutely amazing. And how much money is actually needed? So if you look at our billion-dollar titans here, yeah, the average amount of funding in order to reach a billion-dollar valuation, looking at these companies, is approximately $284 million. That means that if you want to grow into a large business, you actually need to think about it as a very concerted effort, all the way from seed stage into multiple Series A, B, C, and D rounds to raise tremendous amounts of capital. And us at Lakestar, and I'll tell you a little bit about our portfolio later, we're really only focused on what is the next billion-dollar idea. Yeah? And so therefore, we want to be able to deploy really high amounts of money into your business. So I'd imagine for a lot of you guys here sitting today, you know, seed and early stage businesses as well, what is important? You know, when we compare the US to Europe, Europe gets approximately 800,000 as the average seed stage investment, and the US gets 2.1 million. How can we change this? What does it mean? So, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about it. And again, you see in the first round, which is more like the Series A, the US has close to 3 times the level of investment. And unfortunately, this leads to skewed public markets. I think one of the things that we do need to develop in Europe is a much better public market environment. You know, I'm American, but my wife is British, and she basically tells me where I need to live. And so for all intents and purposes, I'm European now. But what that means to me is, how do we make this environment the best environment we can? How can we get the fact that the average or the total market capitalization of internet companies in China is 15 times that of Europe. In the United States, it's 56 times that of Europe. Those are astronomical numbers for a geography that has a higher population than the United States. And this is something that we need to really work on together. But historically, why has this happened? Well, one important topic for all of you today is that historically, money has always followed a flight plan. And I always say this because I have an interesting story. I invested in a friend of mine who was based out of Milan. Absolutely amazing entrepreneur. I invested privately, not out of Lakestar. But all of the VCs and all of the money, a majority of them sat in London for what he was doing. And so the first VC, very prominent one that I introduced him to, said, okay, can you come on a Monday? The second one said, can you come on a Thursday? And next thing you know, he was spending all of his money in his bank account flying into the flight plan. And historically, there have been 3 ecosystems that have received, let's say, 90% of the capital in Europe, and those are Stockholm, Berlin, and London. And I think that what we're finding now with accelerators, with development efforts happening worldwide, that this is changing a bit. So with incubators, seed stage VC funds, and super angels, I think there's a lot more accessible capital. The good is that all of you guys will get advice and capital more readily accessible. Unfortunately, the bad part about it is that the landscape is very crowded. It's very tough to get recognized. And I think one of the important things that you can do is just spend as much time as you can networking, getting to know us, getting to know other VCs and investors early. And I think today, you'll find that tech investing goes completely global. This data is from AngelList, which is one of our investments. But, excuse me, even if you look at Africa, Africa is starting to develop as a real ecosystem where strong entrepreneurs can get recognized. What I would say is implications for early stage startups. Look, today, it's much easier to bootstrap, to test your product and to innovate. You can try it locally in one geography, but think globally, because many investors, if you think you're going to build the next greatest startup just for your own country, you'll have access to great capital. But I think there's a much stronger requirement from investors today for startups to think global from day one. I mean, if you think about the companies coming out of Stockholm, Stockholm is such a small environment. But for the last 5 years, they've built billion-dollar companies like Skype, Spotify, Klarna, King.com. Because their home market is so tiny, they've always thought globally from day one. And today, it's easier than ever, no matter which city you're in, to be able to think this way, all before your first round of funding. And so that's another thing that I would urge you guys to do. Before your first round of funding, I'm going to give you a couple of techniques that you can use. So, unfortunately, we're getting spoiled, we as investors, right? Because there's so many companies now for us to look at, unfortunately, we have higher expectations for you than ever so before. Here's an example. One is we probably expect you to be seeded by friends and family, or a seed stage investment group or angel group. We have an expectation that you've raised a tiny amount of money, and that gives us comfort that you have some vested interest in this. You're going to be very scared about losing your mom's money, right? Unfortunately, we do expect some minimum viable product, a very basic level of product. Why? Because I want to feel it. I want to actually see what you're talking about. Yeah? The days of us investing just on a notepad with an idea, it does happen. It does happen, but I'm not saying that's the norm. We would love, this is obviously a wish list, it's an example and there are exceptions to it, but we'd love to see you have a first customer. Why? Because I think it gives us an indication that people actually want what you sell. And secondly, it gives us an indication that you can sell. That's very important. Technology without sales is nothing. It's just a great idea. And so with your first customer, is this something that people will actually pay for? Can you generate your first bit of revenue? It doesn't have to be a lot, but can you generate your first bit? And do you have some unique IP? Unfortunately, we will not invest in copycats. I know there are great business models coming out of the US or other geographies that could be morphed into this geography, but we just won't do it because I think to reach the billion-dollar club, and that's how we all should be thinking, you need to have some unique IP. What I can tell for you guys is build your trusted referral network as fast as possible, really nurture it. Use tools like AngelList and LinkedIn, and try and build your reference network, because obviously we love meeting new entrepreneurs. I've met many of you at this conference, but if it comes through a trusted recommendation, it's always stronger, as you can imagine. I would give advice that keep your structures very simple. Keep your legal structure very simple. Use a jurisdiction that is commonly known. And one important topic, especially for developing markets, please, all your presentations, all your legal documentation has to be in English. Because the truth of the matter is, we may invest early into your business, but at some stage, I have so many connections back to the United States. I go there so often, and there are big financial hubs in the United States. We'll take you to fundraise over there. We need this from day one. And we don't want any unique financial structures as well. From our portfolio composition, what I can tell you is for successful Lakestar companies, we found that more than 71% of our successful companies, and that means over 4x multiple return, 71% had more than one founder. Find teams. We think that co-founder teams are infinitely more successful. And then we've also found that people who fail the first time and try it again for the second time have a little bit of a higher probability of success. And finally, just remember, persistence. Thank you. That's all for us. And the last thing, just some of the companies that we're invested into.
Fantastic. Manu, thank you very much indeed.